Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Everyday Equity, Everyday Ways to Make a Change. I'm your host, Pooja Kothari, founder of Boundless Awareness. And today we have such a special guest. I am so happy to be talking to Alli Shurilla. Thank you, Alli, for being here. Alli is the founder and lead consultant at AS Community Consulting, a consulting firm supporting community-based organizations with equity-centered and community-based data strategy. Their website is asevaluation.com. And I want to hand it over to you, Alli, to give us more of a description of what you do, who you are, and what interests you.
Yeah. My name is Alli, also Allison. You can pretty much use either. I'm comfortable with both. And my background is in research and evaluation. That's kind of my profession, but I came to this work through a background in community organizing, working in nonprofits, working in public education, teaching, and all of that experience that has kind of guided my career that kind of culminated in this research and evaluation thing. And now the way that I approach my work is by bringing all that experience in and really doing my work from a perspective that's grounded in community, that's grounded in equity, and that moves a little bit beyond these very strict or very kind of cold ideas of evaluation and research and data, and how can we make it really community-centered? How can we bring in elements of DEI, and how can I support the organizations I work with things beyond this data strategy, like their strategic planning or their organizational assessment or some of the other things that they're doing in their organization, really holistically supporting them so that they're doing their best work and we're doing that work together in support of these communities.
Okay, I'm going to say something that might feel unpopular here. Some people might hear data strategy, research, methods, evaluation, assessment, and be like, I don't know what those words mean. That sounds like a lot of math.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? I'm just going to leave that to somebody else. Why is it meaningful for everyone to understand what this is? How can people who are maybe intimidated by this language or the idea of research methods and evaluation get more comfortable with that? And, for a lot of people, oh, I don't understand that. And it's too high level for me. Can you break it down? Mm-hmm. How can it become more approachable?
Yeah, I mean, my definition of evaluation, at least the way that I do it, is we're helping you gather the information that you need to make decisions and tell your story. And it's as simple as that. All of the questions about math and, all of those things, they're one piece of evaluation, but to me, that's not what evaluation is about. And in fact, I'm not a great mathematician. My focus, my expertise is in what we call qualitative methodology, which is storytelling. It's talking to people. It's hearing about their experiences. And then how do we take that information and use it? So I work with an organization, they have a program, and they say, well, we just want to do the best job of serving our community. Evaluation is a tool that we have to help them figure out if they're doing that, how they can do it better, maybe what the impact they're having is, if they have, some decisions to make, if they're not sure which direction to go in. This is the kind of information that can help them by really talking to the community and finding out what their relationship is with that organization, or perhaps maybe something that's missing that the organization could fill a need that isn't there. There are all kinds of questions, all kinds of information that we get to learn through this methodology that doesn't break down into having to know statistical methods or having to be good at math or having to really take that view of it. And it's a very, very diverse field. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. There are folks that really specialize in that and do a really good job. And there are people like me who focus a little bit more on the cultural piece and the storytelling piece.
Can you give us an example of how you come into an organization and then dive into evaluating how a program is doing or how successful it is in meeting the goals of the organization.
Yeah, a lot of my entry point does happen to be through a requirement. Evaluation is something that a lot of times a funder will require, or the person who is giving you money to do your program will say, well, we want to hear how it's going, right? Like, we want to know how you're doing so that you can report back on how it is. And so that often is my entry point. I do sometimes work with organizations who I have a conversation with, or they have maybe another consultant that they work with that might say, oh, that could actually really help us. We had no idea that there was something like that out there that could really be a tool that we could use. So that tends to be my entry point. And my goal when I'm working with the organizations that I work with is really to bridge, or kind of not bridge, but blend, what it is that they need to do. So like this funder is saying, we need you to give us this type of information. We want to hear about these things. But then I take it a step further and figure out how they can do that in a way that maybe answers some other questions. Maybe they have, they're working on something like a strategic plan, or they have other programs that we can also take an approach that looks at all of their programs and how they're doing. There's a lot of different ways that manifests. So typically my entry point is sometimes for like something very targeted, but then once I'm there, we find out that there's like a lot more that we can do and a lot more benefit that information can have.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say you go into an organization and then you got to go into the community that they serve. How do you build that trust?
Mm.
How do you get people to even talk to you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big question. And it's different in every community, which might be an obvious thing to say. But sometimes we do need to say it because we think that we have our methods and we know how valuable what we're doing is, right? And like, we know how it can help and how it can be beneficial. That community doesn't necessarily know that. And in fact, many of the communities that we work in have some type of trauma that's related to having their information taken or having to do things that mimic or perhaps are similar to evaluation methods, like doing surveys, filling out forms, having to talk to someone like, I don't know who you are. And how do we do that? It depends, it's different for every community, really. And my approach is typically to work with the organization. That's my first entry point, is what is your relationship with the community? How can we leverage that? Sometimes I do have clients where we need to kind of go around them a little bit. Maybe one of their issues is they don't have the best relationship with the community, or maybe we can see that they're maybe separate from the people that they want to talk to in some way. And so then I might do some other type of work that is really community focused and actually less focused on the organization. My clients are ultimately the organizations that are paying me to do this work, but I take the responsibility to the communities that they're working with very seriously. And so, I have all of those conversations with my clients. So I often work with other professionals. So I am, the founder and the lead of my business, and this is kind of my show, but I typically collaborate with other professionals, and sometimes they're evaluators and sometimes they're not. But typically when I do that, I do specifically try to work with folks who do have a connection to that community in some way. Maybe they are from that community. Occasionally I work with actual community members and bring them into the planning and the guidance of the project. Maybe they have like an identity that is related to that community that, might support that relationship building. And so I don't do it all myself, is really the kind of biggest answer to that, is that this is a community and that I don't need to do it all myself. And in fact, there are lots of things that I shouldn't be doing. And so, there is also a conversation and a navigation, what's appropriate for me to do personally, and what is something that I can maybe provide an entry point for or hold the container for that is, really working with other folks on these projects.
So speaking of, going into communities that are diverse, that have a variety of needs and expectations of people who evaluate them. Let's talk about anti-oppression work. Mm-hmm. How does it come into play for you? What does it mean to you? How do you incorporate it into your evaluation services? And one question I want to ask now before I forget it is, how do you make sure that your client understands how important it is to you? Is it something you talk about immediately? Is it part and parcel of what you offer? Is it something you bring in the back end? What does it mean to you? And then how do you introduce it to your client?
Yeah, I mean, it really is the foundation of my work. One of the ways that I've described my work is I have always had a connection to community organizing and social justice work. And this is just kind of the manifestation of how I do it. I do see the work that I do as contributing to the social movements that I really want to be a part of. I happen to be good at this. I have some training and some education in it, and I have an interest in it. And so that is kind of the form that it takes. And so really this is, it's the foundation of how I approach evaluation, research, working with my clients, when I do work with other team members and consultants and collaborators, all of that I approach from an equity perspective or an anti-oppression perspective. And as much as I see evaluation contributing to that, I also see my business as contributing to that. As, someone who has my own business, I really have a lot of choice. I have a lot of power to be able to make decisions in terms of what certain things look like, how I go about my day, from how we're going to design this project and actually talk to people, to when we schedule meetings or how we schedule meetings, or what I ask people to be available for, how we negotiate contracts. It really just comes in at every single level. And so like everything that I do, it's really like, how is this contributing to equity or anti-oppression work? And how I talk to my clients about it, it is not hidden. It's publicly available on my website, on my LinkedIn. I do things like this. I have a newsletter. It's not something that I'm quiet about. So I think that if someone is even interested in working with me, they're going to see it whenever they do that kind of background research. They'll look at my website and my LinkedIn and all of these things. They say, who is this person that has submitted a proposal to us, or our colleague referred us to? Do I want to work with them? It's right there. And so then the question is, actually when it comes to the work, what it looks like. And it also, having that public presence also makes it easier for me to introduce it when it comes into the project. It's not a surprise, right? And I'll bring up something like the questions that we're asking, or the methodology we want to use, or whatever it might be. It shouldn't be a surprise that I would take this lens. And if it is, then we can talk about that too. It's all part of the conversation. But yeah, so I like to think that it's not hidden. I'm sure there are things that I can do a better job of, but that's my intention is for it to be front and center. And for it to be very clear and understood when someone's working with me, that's part of the work.
We have a few comments. Cynthia Pong is watching here. She says, excited to be here for this. Community is key, and entrepreneurship and being a business owner provides so much autonomy and many options. It's really true. And I hear what you're saying, that with community organizing and social justice work being so important to you, you design your business around that. And it's not an option that clients can turn on or off. It's part and parcel of your work. Mm-hmm. Do you have an example of, or maybe when you first started out, of clients who may not have been up to speed with anti-oppression work, or why it was even important in the evaluation process?
Yeah. I will say that like my background has blessed me with clients that were on board. Maybe it's because I've always kind of been pretty upfront about it from the beginning. I have definitely, one of the things that I do get pushback on is like the idea sounds great. And in practice, then when we get down to it and what it might look like, sometimes then there's pushback against that. So we find out that doing work in this way might take a lot longer than we anticipated or wanted it to move. We might have to throw out some ideas that we, maybe we're like, let's do a survey. And then we find out that this community is really not into surveys. They've had too much experience with surveys. They didn't like it. So maybe we have to find another way to talk to them. And it might be a way that's going to involve a lot more time and work and attention. Timelines come in. I really see the way that we approach, just kind of the on-demandedness, I don't know if that's a word, of like our work and how it should look. We've got a timeline. I have a year to do this project. I have clients that come to me and are like, we need to have this done in a month. And I might have to come to them and say, that's not really possible, right? Like, or we can do something in a month. We're not going to be able to do that in a month. So it's a lot of times it's a negotiation of like, what is the priority, or what is our balance of priorities? And I'm thinking of a project specifically that I did work on last year. You asked for specifics, and they had a very aggressive timeline. They really wanted things done within a couple of months, and they wanted a lot of work done. And I had to, we had that conversation about, where do we balance our priorities? So we did end up extending the timeline to be a little bit longer so that we could do more things. And we ended up paring back the ambition of all of the data collection things that they wanted to do. And so that was one example of how it looks. It's fairly typical, I think, in most cases, where it's a balance, it's a negotiation of how much of this versus how much of this are we going to do?
Yeah. If you, when you think of anti-oppression work outside of your business practices, what does that look like for you? Like kind of like on a daily basis, on a personal level, or anytime that you're not working?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the same answer, really. It's something that I think about constantly with every decision I make, which might be something that sounds exhausting on the surface, but once you kind of build the habit that is the lens through which you look at everything, it's not so overwhelming. So I think about the media I consume, the social media I consume, when I go to buy clothes or something, where it comes from, when I buy food, where it comes from, and it's kind of often it's the same kind of self negotiation where like what is practical and accessible to me and fits in with my values. And sometimes it's like, man, I would really love to be able to do something like buy completely sustainable wardrobe and like all of this stuff. Those clothes are more expensive. And so it's about maybe having less clothes or having like majority of it from these places, something like that. So that, it really, for me, like it plays a part in everything. You could ask me a specific example and I would tell you how I might try to approach it. And so, yeah, I think I'll just stop there.
And what about like when you're partnering with other people to get, when you partner with others to get a job done or to write a proposal, and maybe they're not in the same, lane ideologically as you are. How does anti-oppression work come into that conversation? Mm-hmm. How do you approach it?
Mm-hmm. I would say that I do have certain boundaries in terms of what, like when I'm hiring someone, how you approach anti-oppression work. It might not be exactly the same way as me, but we need to at least be able to have a conversation about it and see what that looks like, and that certain things might be non-negotiable, right? If if I'm the prime, right? And this is my project and I'm trying to bring people onto my team. If I'm joining someone else's team, then it's the kind of the opposite way. Is what is this project? And, does it meet my standards? I guess you could say it. That's not really quite the right language, but is it participating in equity and anti-oppression work in a way that I want to participate in it? And I have said no to projects that didn't meet that criteria. Mm-hmm. When you're subcontracting under someone else, you have less control over guiding the overall project, but I still usually will offer my advice, will offer my perspective and say, typically I'm hired as like a research or like a data specialist. And so I will always, be offering my perspective. This is how I think we should collect the data. This is how I think we should analyze the data. This is, working with me. This is the approach that I take. And so it really always comes into play.
That's interesting when we talk about like kind of bias in data. You just mentioned in interpreting or analyzing data. Mm-hmm. What are some ways to think about or for us to even question how we look at data, and are we looking at it and applying our own lens, or are we actually looking at it from what the person has told us? Mm. And sometimes those two can get confused, or we can interpret what other people are saying through our lens, and then it actually comes out not with what they said, but through how we've interpreted it. How do you know if that's what you're doing when you're interpreting like qualitative data? Mm-hmm. And how do you avoid that?
I think step one is acknowledging that we all come to the work with biases. I think data and evaluation and research have this kind of reputation, I guess, or this air of being objective or somehow being something that is removed from our experience as biased human beings. And that's just not true. And so the first thing that we need to look at is just the reality is that this is going to be biased in some way, right? It's going to be filtered through my experience, through the experience of the people that I work with, through the experience of my clients, through the experience of what their funders are asking for, all of these things. And so then we know that is true. And so then we can start to investigate it and we can start to pick it apart and try to see where it might be showing up. There's trainings and tools and things you can do to get better at doing that. But it is part of the process, is to see how could this be filtered in the way that, in my particular biases. The second thing you do is don't do it alone. Again, like having other perspectives, having other folks do it. One of the reasons to include community members in the planning and the interpretation process. So saying like, is this a good approach? This is the kind of stuff that we want to know. Is this a good way to get that information? Are we missing something? Like if you ask this question, you're going to get answers like this. Or our community will read this in a certain way, right? Or whatever it might be. And then in interpretation, including them in that process too. So we've gathered the data. We can also potentially include them in the data gathering process, including them as part of the team and then saying, hey, like, here's the data that we have. Here's how I interpreted it. And what do you think? Do you think that's accurate? What am I missing? And it becomes more of a conversation that's really grounded in those multiple experiences. And it's not filtered through one perspective, but it's filtered through numerous perspectives so that we can cross-check some of those biases, or at least have it considered in different ways. And I will say that important to that process is to have a diversity of folks that are involved in that, if it wasn't clear, so that it's not all a bunch of researchers. I don't get a research team of like 5 researchers that have like very similar experiences to me. I get a team of 5 researchers that might have something different to offer, which is then one of the things where it does start to get sticky when you're like, I'm looking for someone that fits these, criteria that I'm looking for, but also I want somebody that's going to challenge my perspective and like give me a different view on things, it does, it gets into deeper and deeper nuance. But I think the theme is that you're doing it. You're at least you're going through the process of trying to acknowledge where you might be having biases. What can you do to check it? What can you do to diversify? How can you get different types of data? I didn't talk about that, but that's another thing that will help with that process.
Okay, a tip that you can give our audience to make anti-oppression work a daily practice. What do you do, and tips that our audience can use that are accessible, or maybe something that they haven't thought about yet?
If it wasn't obvious, making it a daily practice, like kind of building a habit of doing this. And, depending on where you are at in your journey of this work, that might look differently, but it's just like you would build any other kind of habit. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable at first. There's going to be lots of new things. You probably hit points where you're like, I'm doing a great job. And then like something comes out of nowhere and is like, actually, you totally missed something. Right. So it's, there's like a humility that really comes along with it. That's really critical. One thing that for me has been really important on my journey is identifying or learning how to identify the difference between discomfort that is harmful and discomfort that helps you learn and grow. And I think within, some of these systems of oppression, they're designed to self-perpetuate. And one of the tools that they do is having things be very like one or the other, either or. And it's like, discomfort is one of those things that becomes, I suddenly feel attacked because somebody has brought something to my attention that I didn't mean for. Or I feel like I'm being told I'm a bad person because I said the wrong thing to somebody at the wrong time and I didn't realize that was something. Or maybe I did know that and I slipped and I forgot, or whatever that might be. And so I think that's a really big one. That is not cultivated in our culture very well, is really how to identify and investigate that. And to do that, having community, having folks to talk to, people to support you on your journey, being open to that humility and like vulnerable process of being able to process things with people, knowing that, one of my mantras, I guess you might call it, is that we all have a responsibility, but none of us have the full responsibility. So we have to all do our part. Like, you do have a responsibility to do this work, but it's not your job to like come up with all the answers all by yourself. In fact, most of us, I don't know if there's a person that actually could do that, right? Like, we're listening to people who aren't like us. We are absorbing information. It's going to be confusing. It's not going to be straightforward. And that's all part of it. So I would say embrace the fact that it's not a neat and tidy and straightforward process, and to view that with like a curiosity and a spirit of growth and a abundance mindset, if you will, that
Yes.
Doing this is really going to support me in moving forward.
Yes. What you're saying has really resonated with our audience. Rekha Srivastava is saying it, that's very well said. And it came at the time where you said, we have to learn the difference between discomfort that's harmful. I wrote it down because it was so good. And discomfort that helps you grow. And you're right. We don't live in a paradigm that teaches us that. Mm-hmm. And Cynthia Pong says, let's stop suffering in our silos. Oh, that's like Cynthia's tagline. It's so, so important. We're not alone. And I think, really asking other people, this is how this sounded to me. Mm-hmm. Is this how it sounds to you? Because that's the only way we know if we have a trigger that is specific to us, or if this is like a general way that everybody, not everybody, but like a lot of people might feel it. Is it a common feeling? Cynthia also says it's important to separate the person from the thing or the action. And I think that goes for ourselves. It's really important to separate us from the feedback that we get. They're two separate things. Oh, Cynthia, all of these are great. I was just thinking about how the right to comfort is a white supremacy culture characteristic.
Yeah.
One last question. We have your how to contact you, asevaluation.com on LinkedIn, and I'm sure other socials, at Allison Shurilla. How do we get onto your newsletter?
It's on my website. You kind of have to actually scroll to the bottom. That's probably something that I could do better at in terms of my own marketing. But yeah, it's on my website. It's just down at the bottom.
Brilliant. And same here. If you want to sign up for the Boundless Awareness newsletter, go to our website, boundlessawareness.com, and you can find us there. Alli, I am so happy to get this time with you. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas. You see, people, anti-oppression work, it goes into all areas, even data evaluation and assessments. So thank you, Alli, for your time. And we will see you in 2 weeks with an amazing guest, Chris Hooten. All right. See you next time.
Bye.